Hey Patreons, Aaron Cowan. I wanted to do a quick video on how I go about setting up my rifles. This is basically spurred by some conversations or some comments and some direct messages I've gotten on social media when I did rifle tour videos, specifically the ones I did on Instagram, just showing people like, you know, my workhorses. So I wanted to take just a general approach to a couple different types of rifle, kind of like a series, if you will, following on from our series that I did on dry fire. That's just another series of just setting rifles up. And I think I'd start things off with kind of my main to go-to workhorse, which is my Sage Edition. This is the Sons of Liberty Gunworks Sage Edition, which is a 12.5-inch carbine light gas system. And it is intended to be a hard use but accurate rifle. The main purpose behind it was to fit as many rolls as possible while being sold as a pistol. And of course you had the option to, like I did, SBR it, turned it into an SBR, and of course you can SBR anything you want, depending on if you want to get involved with paperwork or not. But just kind of discussing the features that go into a rifle, kind of break down why I set things up the way I do, because maybe some of the advice will help you, or maybe some things that I do might not have occurred to you. The very first thing, of course, is what's the rifle for? If it's for general purposes, you'll notice with this rifle I have a non-magnified aim point mounted on a Unity tactical mount, which then has a maul and a weapon light. And that's pretty much all the accessories that are on the gun, except for some grip and some ergonomic features in these rail scales and this rail scale hand stop. And then after that, the only choice is control features. Are you gonna go ambi or not ambi? What kind of trigger are you gonna put in it? Muzzle device, if that's something you're worried about. And of course the stock factors in, and then the sling. So there's a lot of considerations that go into putting a rifle together. For me, I'm kind of boring. This particular rifle is set up mainly for night vision use. I mean, it's got a maul on it, so everything kind of builds off of that. Can I put a night vision device on a magnified optic rifle? Yes, we'll get to that in another video. However, it's incredibly difficult to almost impossible to not worth it to passively aim through a magnified optic. So for me, if it's going to be a gun that's going to spend a lot of the time, or at least half the time, doing night vision stuff, I'm going to throw a red dot on it because I can passively aim through that if I need to or want to. So I went with the maul. To me, the maul is the best non-restricted laser that's out there. That being said, you can find a gray market, as they call it, PEC 15, or maybe a Raid X or an LA5. A lot of other options out there. If you're gonna go with a Steiner like a D-ball, you're gonna need a good illuminator, because the Steiners produce great laser for realistic distances, but their illuminators are where they really suffer because they are, well, restricted. So they're not able to put out the same kind of horsepower that a military unit would, because someone decided that, you know, plebes are not allowed to have that or whatever. The maul overcomes that issue. So if you're willing to spend the money and get in the night vision gang, I would recommend just getting the maul, as opposed to a Steiner and an illuminator, because everything you're gonna need is right there in the package. You're not gonna need a secondary or a tertiary lighting system. For the weapon light, I went with a Mod Light, Surefire Scout Light, Cloud Defensive, a lot of great options out there. I use all of them. So there's not one particular brand that I only use. They all provide pros and cons depending on what you're trying to do with them. For the actual light activation, Unity hot button. Great thing about the hot button is I can go constant on, I can shoot, and then constant off. When you're setting up your rifle, especially if you have an expectation to shoot it for night vision, my advice to you is get down in the prone position before you marry yourself to a specific placement of the light controls. Because some people, I see this a lot in classes, and I've dealt with this earlier on in my career before I'd learned better. I'd go into a prone position and it was really hard to activate my light, especially if I was running a momentary only system, which is one of the reasons I like constant on. I turn the light on, I shoot, I turn the light off. So no matter what physical position I'm in, I can use the grip that I want to use versus having to compromise my grip to use the light control. As far as the controls on the maul go, yes, you can get switches for them. I just generally don't need them for this particular length, this particular configuration. Getting into the optic itself, you'll notice that there's no obvious backup iron sights on this rifle. However, there is a peep sight built into the Unity mount. And then I have a Magpul MBus Pro up there. Those are zeroed. I shoot with them occasionally during practice, but as a general rule, I've got a laser. I'm sorry, I've got a optic, and then I've got a visible and an IR laser, and then iron sights will give me 4 ways to aim if I really need it. So yeah, I left them on the rifle because there's room. On guns where there's not room, the iron sights are usually the first thing to get voted off if I'm running the rifle with a laser system, or LAM, or whatever you want to call it. Sling is kind of a personal preference. 2-point is great. 2-point, single point adjustable, fast adjustment. I'm using a Flatline Fiberco, and I've got a Neomag capture strap. I believe they call it the Century strap, which is a little magnetic band right here that I can fold my sling up and capture it very easily for storage, for transportation. QDs, just find mil-spec ones. I've got so many different QDs, I couldn't tell you who makes what. But everything's locked up front right there. The QD system is something I use if I have to. I don't really need it, but since it's easier sometimes to set up QD than it is go to a dedicated ring system, I'm just gonna go with that. Muzzle device in this rifle is the Nox, which pairs well with my Chemo system, which can be used with dead air or other cans that are compatible with it. And then we kind of get into the final features, which is furniture. I like the Magpul Mo grips. I think they're a good size for my hand. I don't necessarily need the additional cost or features that I'm gonna get from a Mayat or some of the other grips that are out there. And I don't really care as much, at least for general purpose rifles, for the grip angle that I find with some others. Some of the other videos we do, I'll talk about that. CTR is a good stock, but so is the Mo. Honestly, this one just has that additional ability to kind of lock the stock down in the position you want it in, which I can appreciate, but it's not something I necessarily need. And then finally, the big point of contention, beyond trigger. This rifle has a Geissele trigger in it. I do like a 2-stage trigger for most purposes. I like that ability. A single-stage trigger is great for dedicated, non-magnified, super fast on paper guns, but I'm just so used to a 2-stage trigger. I've been using a 2-stage trigger my entire life, at least in the AR platform, from the military until today, which is over 20 years. And I kind of feel like the advantage that a single stage provides doesn't give me the ability to do what I like to do with a single stage. A single stage gives me a little bit more of change my mind, a little bit more tactile when that round's gonna break versus a single stage. In a precision rifle, maybe, but even in precision guns, I prefer 2-stage as well. And of course, that's a point of contention. The one thing I do not care for, because I shoot almost always suppressed, is cassette style triggers. Your drop-in, quote-unquote drop-in triggers. They don't mix well with gases, excess gases being blown back into the gun by suppressor if that's something you have. So I would advise against them if you're gonna shoot a lot of suppressed. Occasionally suppressed or not suppressed at all, knock yourself out. And then finally, the safety selector. This is a 45 throw, the Radian 45 throw that comes on this rifle. A 90's fine, cool. You'll notice that I've removed the right side because it does come as an ambi selector and I've removed that other side. Those tend to brush against gear, even with the shorter throws on them. And sometimes with the longer throws on them, when you sweep it down, it runs into your index trigger finger. My feeling is if you're left-handed, use a left-handed safety. If you're right-handed, use a right-handed safety. I just don't like the risk of the ambi safety sweeping against my gear when I'm hands off the rifle and brushing the selector from safe to fire or from safe to full auto, depending on which rifle you have. Some people may be like, well, you got to manage your gear. And I'm like, yeah, but sometimes I'm busy. That's the whole reason I went hands off. Not something I have to worry about so much anymore, but I have had instances in my career where I've witnessed bad things happen because of ambi selectors. So just for me, my preference, I'm going to get away from them. Some people bring up, well, what if you're clearing a house or something and you got to bump over, or you got to transfer the rifle over your other shoulder? That's getting into techniques and tactics. But the short answer to that is I don't transfer the rifle over to the other side of my body. I literally bump it over so I can maintain same controls. I clear what I'm clearing and then I bump back. If I'm gonna be staying on a corner for 20, 30, 40 minutes, I might then transfer the rifle's control completely over, but I can still get to that selector with my thumb. It's not a big deal. So the likelihood of needing an ambi safety is not overpowering enough for me to use one. I can still get the job done using a traditional right hand safety selector. So that's the first video in this series. We're talking about just a general purpose rifle featuring my Sons of Liberty Gunworks 12.5 inch Stage Edition rifle, what's on it and why it's there. Final point, because I'm sure somebody's gonna bring it up. Some people, it's not as common as it used to be, but a lot of people used to put their optic all the way back to the rear, to the receiver. You don't see that much anymore, but sometimes people still ask about it. It's there for clearance and peripheral vision. Because it's a red dot and it's basically infinite eye relief, I'm gonna put it wherever I need to put it. I generally don't wanna push it out on the rail unless I have to. So as long as it's on the receiver, I'm gonna maintain rigidity and 0. I move mine out a little bit to open up my peripheral vision, but also if I'm wearing night vision and I wanna passively aim, I'm not gonna bump into it or risk bumping into it. And that's pretty much my setup, my reasoning behind my general purpose rifle. Till next time, Patreons, Aaron Cowan, Sage Dynamics.